Good afternoon. Welcome to the Training Initiative's monthly Future Leaders webinars. Today, our focus is on leadership and management, and specifically the keys to developing effective leadership within your business, growing and nurturing your talent effectively through that model. And I'm joined by a fantastic panel of experts. Sarah Radley, Managing Director at Acuity Finance. Ian Harrison, leadership coach and co-author of The Enabling Manager. Mark Panades, owner of Obsidian Investments, and Max Reynolds, apprenticeship consultant. I'm going to quickly pass the mic round, so to speak, and just ask each of my guests just to introduce themselves and say a little hello and tell you a bit about what they do. Mark, you're directly to my left, so I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Panades, owner of Obsidian Business Investments, and I invest in businesses with the aim of trying to grow them. Simple as that.
Perfect. On to Ian.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, I'm Ian. I work with senior leadership teams, one-to-one coaching, helping leaders to think clearly and plan clearly, and developing leadership skills within businesses.
Thank you. On to you, Sarah.
Hi everyone. Hi, I'm Sarah Radley. I am the founder and managing director of Acuity Finance. We provide cash flow and property finance into the SME sector. That's what we do.
Lovely. And finally, Max. You're on mute, Max. You're on mute.
Sorry, schoolboy error. Sorry, I'm Max, and I've had most of my career was working for BT and Accenture, and working with those companies, I worked with large other businesses to set up apprenticeships. And since leaving them, I've worked with companies like RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, Santander, Vodafone, O2, setting up apprenticeships, large-scale apprenticeships with them.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So, just to reiterate, the purpose of our webinar today is really to look to we're looking to provide some good commentary and conversation about what are the keys to establishing good leadership within your business, and also instilling those skills within your workforce and moving forward. And I hope that you'll see at the end that we've got a great skill set with the panel to be able to talk from the position of that topic within SMEs right up into large corporations. So I'm going to start straight off. We're going to start with the question: what makes a leader effective? And I think that's something that we will all have had experience of when we know something isn't being effective. But maybe it's not always so tangible to identify what we need to do as leaders to make sure that we can be effective for those that work with us and for the development and progress of the business. So I'm going to turn to you for an answer here first, Ian. In your role as leadership coach, you go into a lot of businesses. I suppose you're probably well equipped to give a good point of view on what your view on that is. What does make a leader effective from your perspective of that coaching?
So I'm going to break it down to three things, all of which unsurprisingly come from the model in The Enabling Manager. So I think first and foremost, effective leaders enable the people they're leading to understand how their work contributes to the bigger picture. So that might be about the sort of really top level around purpose. So understanding how the different roles within the business fit into the business delivering its big purpose, if you like. it might be much more granular than that. It might be about understanding how, if I can put it this way, the jigsaw works. So how your specific role fits with everybody else's specific role. Because one of the things we know is that we're all more motivated when we understand that we're making a difference. And so effective leaders essentially enable people to understand the difference they're making, both to colleagues, to clients, to suppliers, and if you want to broaden it right out into our societal impacts as businesses. So I think that's the first thing. The second would be they create clear objectives and expectations around what they're looking for from their team or teams. So people understand what's expected of them. They understand what success looks like. I remember sitting on a board discussion around a strategic plan this particular board were putting together. And after I'd done the work, a couple of the board members collared me and said, you kept asking a question that we're not used to, and which puzzled me. So I said, well, which question? And they said, well, it was a 2-day project. And they said, for 2 days, you've been asking, how will you know you've succeeded? And it's mind-boggling to me that you can put together a strategic plan and not ask the question, how will you know you've succeeded? But in the same way, leaders need to set clear objectives so that their teams know when they're succeeding, and clear expectations, which would be around processes and procedures and timelines and all those good things that enable us to play together, if you like, in a business and to achieve the goals we need to achieve. And then I think the third thing would be, it's then about stepping back. So it's about giving the people in your team space and enabling them to bring their insights, their expertise to get stuff done. But with that autonomy, if you like, within understanding the objectives, within understanding the purpose, understanding the parameters, if you like, that created by the timelines and process and procedures, then to say, okay, you're the expert here. How are you going to do it? And it's that sort of almost a coaching approach then from the leaders to bring in their team to really engage and get stuff done. And I'm going to add a fourth. The fourth is build strong relationships where people trust each other, where people trust the leader and the leader trusts their people. So those would be my sort of headlines around effective leadership. Be clear about the context so that people understand the bigger picture. Be clear about your objectives and expectations. Build strong relationships and enable your team then to go and do what they do best and use their skill, their insight to get stuff done and really deliver.
Thank you. And I think that's that model of the. I'm just thinking through to the book, the Enabling Manager. That model that is the theme throughout of the why, the what, the how.
Yeah.
Lead, manage, coach is a kind of the essence maybe of what you're saying there. Yeah, I just made a couple of notes there. Obviously, the bit of trust, the communication with your team is essential. But the measuring the impact. I mean, from my perspective, that's got to probably be one of the toughest aspects, because you can kind of set your goals as a leader. You can identify, you can try and communicate that. There's a lot of bumps along the way, aren't there? So measuring that doesn't necessarily. That might identify that things are going wrong early on.
Yeah, and that's where you've got to stay in touch, so you're not micromanaging, but then when you do hit bumps in the road, you are there. The team can discuss those. The team can bring those up. And if necessary, you can adjust your parameters. You can adjust the way you're doing stuff. You can even adjust the goals if that's the appropriate thing. But it's a bit like if nobody knows what they're aiming at, how are you going to score a goal? I often use the analogy of blokes setting up a game of football on a park. And the first thing it does is 4 blokes take their jumpers off and create goals at either end of the pitch. And then somebody kicks the ball sort of between the jumpers, but quite high. So now there's a debate as to, was it underneath or over the non-existent bar? Did they get the goal or not? So then there's a decision that the bars are set by some mark on an adjacent tree. And so now the goals are defined. But then the game spreads out in midfield and becomes unplayable. So then they have to decide where the boundaries are, because nobody's decided where the edge of the pitch is. And eventually, with all these negotiations going on, the game becomes playable. And you can look at all those. You can look at the defined goals. You can look at the edges they've put around the pitch, or if you go to a sort of properly marked pitch. Every one of those lines on a proper football pitch could be seen as defining a restriction. You can't take the ball beyond that line. You can't. The goalkeeper can't handle the ball outside of the box that defines his area. The game has to begin on that spot in the centre of the pitch, and all those other things we could talk about to do with the markings on the pitch. All of them, in some ways, define restrictions, but those restrictions make the game playable. And actually, they enable the team to then play creatively within the boundaries of the pitch, within the expectations. The goals are clearly defined. Go get them. And I think that's what we do when, as leaders, we set our objective. We've got to define the goals clearly so people know where they need to kick the ball. They'll know when they've scored. And we need to define the parameters and objectives clearly so that they can have freedom to play the game in the way they know best.
Okay, great. Yeah, I like that analogy. And actually, with a sporting analogy, it seems a perfect time to ask for your opinion, Mark.
It's a question, actually, and I think it's one that the audience might be interested in. And I certainly am, because one thing about all us leaders, we're learning every day. And as much as we've got experience, we're all still learning. So I've done that in one of my businesses. I've done the 3 things that Ian has suggested. I've stepped back. I've given them space. But I don't feel that I get enough feedback unless I ask for it. And it's that sort of double-edged sword of how hands-on do I get to ask for that feedback, and what do you do if you're not getting the feedback often enough, regular enough? So that's obviously probably a question to you, Ian, but certainly I'm sure that people can answer that.
So I'm happy to answer that, but if somebody else wants to chip in as well, if they've got experience. So well, for me,
yeah, go on, Ian. I know that Max has got a point.
So I think it is you've got to have that feedback. You've got to create those feedback loops, and that takes work, and that's where it's easy for me to list out those 3 things. But there are a lot more challenges to put them into practice. I think finding ways of creating those opportunities so you're understanding what's going on, you've got the feedback, whether that's data measurements could be part of the feedback, or whether it's sitting around talking to people and getting that feedback. And then it comes into creating a psychological safety so that people feel confident to be able to give the feedback, even if it's not good, so that they don't, because the other danger there is people start covering up when it's not going well because they don't want the leader to respond badly. and there's got to be that safety thing of people feeling I can say what needs to be said, and we'll just talk it through and we'll work it through together. But again, it's so much easier to say than to do, to create that culture. And I'm sure that was sort of what Mark did and tried to do within that instance.
Yeah, because it does strike me, that analogy you're talking about, where you're talking about in the park, you're defining things as you're going along. You know, that there's a process of negotiation there, and just to set the parameters and say these are the restrictions, that doesn't necessarily engender that culture you're talking about, that positive mindset from others. It does that. Those conversations do need to be a form of negotiation, don't they, to get people on board. You know and to get people to think like leaders themselves at any level in the company. You do need them to. You need them to feel to empower them, as you mentioned earlier, and that's got to come through those conversations. It's a negotiation of where the goals are and how we're going to achieve them, or what needs to be done to achieve them.
Yeah.
Max, this seems like a good to bring you in. I know you have a point to make.
Yeah, just a point. I mean, I'd like to differentiate leadership and management. And I'd like to sort of not a definition of leadership, but just something that cropped up as I was thinking, listening to the guys talking there. I think a leader is somebody who points to the future, who communicates a vision of achievement that perhaps the people on the team wouldn't think that they could achieve, that probably stretches people beyond what they believe currently they can do. So a leader is somebody who points, and that's about communication, and that includes feedback and negotiation, all that kind of stuff. I think a leader is also somebody who demonstrably lives the values. So if they're saying we're going to go there, then the leader needs to say, and I'm going to go with you, or I'm always going to be there with you. So that's the kind of that you live the culture, and that's about creating the culture that we've been talking about. And I think somebody clever once said to me, if you want to know if you've got leadership skills, look behind you, because if nobody's following you, then maybe you don't have. But if people are following you, then maybe that then becomes your burden and your role and your vision for the future, to be a leader, to step up to that role.
It's interesting you use the word burden there, because I suppose, I mean, it's relevant to any position you have as work. You know, we know there are good days, there's bad days, but there's definitely times where you can feel you've got a poison chalice on there, and you know that you've put yourself in that situation. I feel, Sarah, like this isn't the right time after I just said that to bring you into the conversation. But if we ignore the fact I've talked about a poison chalice, I am really intrigued to know from your perspective of leading Acuity Finance, your point of view on this.
It's really interesting, because I think culture is incredibly important, and when you talk about poison chalice and burden, I think as a business owner, I think it's important to demystify what that actually means. I think sometimes people work for other people and they see the top, what's happening here. They don't really understand what it takes to make the business work on a day-to-day basis, and that comes back to that whole leadership thing around culture, around involvement. And for me, my biggest thing that I try to do as an individual, as a leader, is to listen and to create a safe space for those feedback loops that you were talking about, Ian, and actually be open to change. You know, we all have our plans, and sometimes our plans get ripped up and thrown out of the window. And it's about being able to say, actually, that's fine. That didn't work. We learned from that. And what can we do better? I don't have all the answers, team. Tell me what you think. You're at the coalface. Tell me what it's like for you. And I have to listen to that, and I have to take that feedback, and then we create a new plan, or we adopt our plan to trying to get to that end piece, which is hopefully we win the match, to use Ian's analogy. but it's not easy at times.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me that what you're talking about, a safe space, and that space to listen to. You've got to make space. You've got to make time for those feedback loops. You mentioned psychological safety, Ian, and actually, that's something we're going to be discussing in our next webinar. We've got one on mental health and well-being, and I suppose that's at the end of June. But I suppose that's integral to the idea of how you lead a team, how you support a team, understanding that you need to be looking at that for their well-being, for them to feel that they can speak out if they need to, that they've got those safe spaces, as you say, and that they have got people around them that are going to listen to the points they've got. I know, Sarah, with regard to Acuity, you're currently going through you're preparing for a significant expansion. So sort of when you're from inside the business, from your perspective, what do you feel you're needing to do? Because you clearly know how to lead a team, you've got experience in that. When you know that's going to expand and you're going to have a significant more team members, what are you doing to prepare for that journey?
I think it's about having a plan, but not being too rigid in that plan. It's about getting the basics right, and that comes down to the basic day-to-day admin of a business, all the way up to the horrible word of strategy. And if we can try to get those basics right, then that does help. I think from my perspective, it's about the right team. And surrounding yourself with the right team, and that could be the team that work for the business, that could be a team outside of the business. And one thing that I do know is that when you are growing a business and you are trying to scale considerably, resilience, support, clear messaging to your team and to external stakeholders becomes even more important than it was when you drafted the plan on a piece of paper back in the day. And I think for me, nobody has a plan to run a business and it goes exactly to plan. It doesn't work like that. I think it's about saying, actually, it's okay. I'm going to make mistakes. Our staff, our team make mistakes. We make mistakes. And I think, going back to what you guys were saying earlier about it's that whole learning piece. Every day I want to learn something new. And that could be learning something from within the business, from mistakes that have been made within the business that we can correct and not make again in the future. Or it's some learning from people like the people on the panel, from best practice and experience that they've had within their experiences within business and the people that they work with. So I think how do you scale? It comes back to having a plan, having a good culture, having the right team. Something that you said, Ian, struck me about the team and accountability. And it's not just about being accountable to the business, it's about having self-accountability. And that happens right at the top as well. One of the things that I've recently done in the past 18 months is become more accountable to people outside of my business as well as inside my business, which was a big step for me. But I realized that if I didn't do that, I couldn't grow as a leader and I wouldn't be the best leader of my business. And so I have an external mentor and an external panel of people that I work with that help me to make those difficult decisions, because there are difficult decisions to be made in business. And I think that accountability piece is incredibly important. It'd be interesting to see what the rest of you think about that, because I think it's one of the most important things about being a leader.
Yeah, I mean, I'd quite like to bring you in at this point, Max, because I just wonder how you feel that aligns with the work that you did with some of those bigger, larger corporations such as BT. I know one of the key roles you had was sort of setting up those leadership programs.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of leadership programs are non-leaders, which is a very specific thing. I think what's happened over the past 10 or 15 years is that companies, big and small, but I've mostly dealt with corporate companies, have recognised that leadership and management isn't necessarily something that just comes from somebody who's good at their job on the shop floor. But that needs specific training, and I've been heartened by, the focus on. So, what is it that makes a good leader? What is it that makes a good manager? And systematizing those things as far as you can. A lot of leadership is about personality and communication and so on, but there are also some skills that you can identify and follow through. And working with BT and Accenture and the big banks, Santander, RBS, Vodafone, they've all recognised that. In fact, a number of organisations transferred their graduate programs, so that bringing graduates into the company, the first thing they did was put them on a leadership development apprenticeship, often in the case of some of the companies I worked with, recognizing that actually these people were very highly skilled, very highly qualified people, but they were starting on the bottom ladder of leadership and management, and they needed retraining.
And do you think, going back to Sarah's question, do you think that is that's deliberate, that those programs, they are set to instill some accountability from those early stages, even with individuals who are just at sort of a supervisor's level, having a program of learning, perhaps a mentor, a coach, a tutor, someone that's supporting them through to recognise they have to be accountable, not only to the business, as Sarah said, but to themselves. If they're going to be a leader, they've got to be setting goals, achieving, and continually moving. Again, going back to the
I mean, and the whole thing about learning programs like apprenticeships, what is that you do have to you are accountable to a mentor. I love what Sarah said about having an external accountability, and some of the businesses I'm working with now are looking much more about that, and having people from outside the business with no particular axe to grind, but critical friends, if you like. It's great to have a critical friend who will advise you when you're going off track, or encourage you when you are on track, but actually doesn't have a real axe to grind, or is not going to win or lose by that. I think it's really important.
I don't know if any else, Ian, Mark, if you've got anything you wanted to say about that question of Sarah's about accountability from within.
So I think one of the things that's changed in leadership is that there was a time when the leader was expected to be invincible and right all the time and all those sort of things, and actually, as a leader, making yourself accountable and it flags up. It's back to the thing about living values that we've spoken about. That if the values of the company involve being able to make mistakes and pick them up and learn from them and move on, then having that a leader who doesn't pretend to be perfect, acknowledges that they need to be held accountable, that they do make mistakes, that they're on a learning journey as well, is all part of creating trust in a modern place of work, because people want to see human leaders, not the superhuman leaders that perhaps previous generations wanted to see. So I think it's all builds together to build trust in the team when the leader sets up their own accountability, whether that's directly with their own team, which is also a good thing. Giving your team freedom to challenge you is a great thing, or whether they know you have accountability outside. I think it's all really important for that.
Great, and I just suppose we mentioned this external stakeholders, the accountability for outside as well as inside. Mark, from your perspective, when you're looking to invest in a business, I mean, I suppose that's something that's kind of key to you about how a business does communicate with external stakeholders. And I mean, what does good leadership look like to you? You know, if you're looking for a business, if you're looking at one that you think you're interested in, what's that look like from the outside?
Yeah, very interesting question, Ben. I regularly do leadership discussions because I regularly arrange for probably 20 business owners to be in a room, and obviously, as you know, you've been involved with them, Ben, and we did one recently at a company called BDO, and we did it with their mergers and acquisitions, and it was all about acquiring businesses. It was about exiting businesses. And, you know, the first question we asked them was, what is the most important thing in a merger and acquisition? And they said the leadership team. They said, everybody, the perfect way to exit a business and the perfect way to purchase a business is when the leadership team is in there and the owner of the business almost makes him or herself redundant. So the business operates without them. So if I look at my perfect investment, and I've recently made one which I'm hoping is going to be a perfect investment for me. And believe me, I've made many over the years which haven't been perfect investments. But I've made one in the sense of they have all the leadership in there anyway. And so from my point of view, my skill set is it's about sales and marketing, it's about strategy, it's about contacts, it's about my experience, my black book. So I can add my leadership style to that, but it doesn't affect them at all. So to have a business that's already really, really well managed with great leadership skills is ideal. And the other thing for me is because I'm involved in different businesses, I've got a barometer. So people can say to me, I mean, I had a situation where we had a business that was going fantastically. It had some boardroom discussions. We decided to have a reshuffle, and we decided to not have a managing director. And we couldn't agree on who would be the managing director, so we decided to not have a managing director. I thought at the time that it was going to be a disaster. It pretty much was a disaster, and took lots and lots of time to rebuild because all of a sudden there was come back to Sarah's word about accountability, there was no real accountability. Everybody was falling between the slats and saying, yes, but what we need some leadership. But no one was actually given that leadership because no one had got the responsibility of being a leader. And then also, once you start to bring politics in, so yeah, that's what I say across the board. I've got this barometer, and what's really fascinating is the people in these businesses. They say, "Oh yeah, but we've got a great business, and that might be the only business that they've ever been involved with. And in their mind, they think it's a great business. But from my point of view, having been in multiple businesses, you know, sometimes people kid themselves that they've got a great business, and actually, the reason the figures aren't great is because of X, Y, and Z. And lots of people won't look in the mirror. So leadership is absolutely critical to every single business that I'm involved with, whether it be I'm involved with as a client, I'm involved with as a supplier, I'm involved with as an investor. It's absolutely paramount. And it's also something you've got to constantly keep working on, and you've got to be looking at the next generation of leaders. You know, you can't be standing still. You can't be saying, okay, we've got that structure now, that's perfect, because it won't be perfect, because you don't know what other people are thinking. You don't know whether other people are stifled and they're looking to move on and leave and go to a different company. So, but then once you've got that leadership that you trust, And you guys know I'm involved in businesses where I've got implicit trust with the leadership team, and it's wonderful because you don't second guess, you don't think. So yeah, I just almost finish off my point really, where leadership is the most important point about any business as a business investor.
Yeah, I suppose that last comment you made, that on trust, brings us back to really the first thing that was mentioned, that ability to communicate effectively. Effective communication can only come when you've got that relationship of trust between each other, and that relationship of trust only comes when the communication is good and consistent. I suppose it's almost a continual circle, isn't it? And I suppose the thing I was thinking of with what you were saying there, Mark, and you mentioned there are times where things do work, times where perhaps they don't, and I suppose that kind of being able to identify a process of what are the metrics that are needed to see that we're making the progress, to see that together we are growing in the direction we want is really key to that. Max, I suppose when you mentioned earlier that the some work where you were taking leadership programs, so existing graduate programs, and placing them into apprenticeship programs. How does that work to support a kind of whole vision of a company going forward?
Okay. I mean, the kind of companies that I was working with generally had graduate programs anyway that they were used to running, and would be things where people would circulate around different departments and so on. I suppose by integrating that into a management apprenticeship program, you could use the training that they were doing already and map that onto an apprenticeship program. But what you would then do is not only end up with people having incorporated the values and development within the company to the company's values and the company's targets and so on, but also giving them a formal qualification and formal training in the discipline of leadership and management. So it was a matter of sort of dovetailing the two together, so you got the sort of best of both worlds out of that.
And did that just have to sit in with that kind of existing vision, or were there examples of businesses where actually that alteration of what they saw as their leadership and management program for upcoming staff, did that then have an impact on their vision, their vision as a business as a whole?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like I say, in corporate world, it's difficult to see the whole business as a whole, changing as a result of one graduate program. But definitely, you would see people coming out of those programs better equipped to be the leaders that they were recruited to be. I mean, oftentimes companies bring in graduates, wanting them to be, expecting them to be future leaders, but not necessarily giving them the technical skills that they needed, giving them the professional skills that they needed, but not necessarily integrating management and leadership skills. But by formally integrating the programs into management apprenticeships, and not just management apprenticeships, also project management apprenticeships, for example, they would again they would achieve that formal qualification. Often at a lower level, you'd get people coming into graduate programs having graduated, obviously, so they'd already got a level 6 degree program, and you would say, well, we're going to put you on a leadership management program at level 3, and some of them would bridle a bit against that and say, well, I'm training at level 6. But you say, well, actually now management is, you are starting again. You've got professional skills, you've got academic skills, you've got technical skills, but actually as a leadership and management, you need to start again. So let's start those building blocks at level 3 and then go on from there. And oftentimes people have gone on, and got higher apprenticeships than that, beyond that.
And Ian, the work you do, I suppose, is like tends to be focused. That coaching role going into a business tends to be much more focused on the existing leadership team, whether that's just an individual or the team as a whole. I mean, it strikes me that there are similarities. Really, as I see from our apprenticeship programs, there's an element of coaching that goes on. There's a workplace mentor. There's a tutor, and it gives the individual on that program the opportunity to have sort of two sounding boards that can be separate. And I suppose that's what the coaching model offers when you're going into a leadership group. I mean, is there a difference between when you're coaching one individual or when you're coaching them as a group? I think that's really the question I'm trying to get to.
So I think when I'm working with groups, more often I'm providing some content. So one useful distinction might be to make the distinction between teaching and learning. So teaching is where you have to give people stuff so that they don't know. Learning is something they have to do for themselves. So when I'm coaching one-on-one, the way I would think about most of the work I do one-on-one is I'm facilitating the other person to learn. So to take what they know and work out how to use it, to think about stuff and everything they've learned and apply it into the business in a thoughtful way. When I'm in a group, some of the work I'm doing is facilitating that kind of conversation. So I tend to be quite conversational in the way I run stuff. But there's also an element of, here's a really useful model that you might not have used before to think about this sort of stuff. So there's that. There's more input, if you like. So I think it's about people can't apply what they don't know. And as Max was talking about, it's really good to hear about those companies putting in those leadership programs for graduates, because you see it in so many small businesses and big businesses. People get promoted. It's that old phrase, people get promoted to their point of incompetence. So they come in and they're good at what they do, so they get a promotion, and they're good at what they do, and eventually they end up in a position which isn't about what they used to do. It's now about people. It's about leading people and managing people, and that's now a very different skill set. And for some people, they don't have the natural thing just to, in the early days, blunder their way through until they learn how to do it, and it falls apart. So I think when I'm working with most senior leaders, I do a one-on-one. It's a lot more about facilitating them to think clearly about what they know and to apply it in situations. When I'm working with groups, there's a little bit more teaching leadership and management models, and then getting them to think about how they're going to use them. I think that answers the question. I think I got somewhere close to the question there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I know, Sarah, I see you put a question out. You'd said it to Max while he was talking, but I wonder, I'm just going to ask the whole panel this. Are leaders, are people born as natural leaders? And therefore, are there individuals that, that fit that leadership model? And then conversely, are there those that can't fit it, or can anyone be trained? Are those leadership skills some skills that anyone can learn and learn to apply?
Can I speak to that, Sarah? Thank you for the question that you put to me. I think anybody can improve. Anybody can become a better leader and a better manager, but some people naturally have better communication skills than others, just as some people have better technical skills than others. And I think it's about identifying your next generation of leaders is to do with that, isn't it? I mean, I hear what Ian said about leadership. We recognise now that leaders don't have to know everything and can't be answerable for everything. But you do recognise you can recognise those people who have the potential for leadership, But that's not to say nobody. That's not to say that you could write somebody off and say you can't do it. Anybody can learn. Anybody can improve. I think some people just are naturally gifted at communication, and communication is the absolute key skill.
And I suppose we probably can all think of individuals who have excelled in one area, but then perhaps struggle at that point of going on to that kind of that leading people or managing people, particularly early on. If that's an early part of your career, I think the point that's been made by both Max and Ian is people find themselves in those roles at times, and they haven't really been trained to have them. So you're talking about kind of being over promoted to the point of failure. I think that being able to identify, if you're identifying as a leader who you feel is going to be effective, training them from an early part, or talking to them about what you want to go through there, what you want from them is probably key to that, and that again comes to those conversations. I mean, do you feel that, does that sound true to you, Sarah, with your role?
It's interesting, actually. I always have believed very much in people can be trained to do anything. But however, over my experiences of running my business, especially over the last 10, 12 years, I've realized that isn't the case. And sometimes we put too much effort into the wrong people, too much trust into the wrong people who don't have shared values. But we live and learn. And for me, what I try and do is try and challenge the people that I think may have got what it takes. Somebody once said to me, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I find that's a really good litmus test for being able to push through. And I think it does either makes you or breaks you. And it's either something you can do or you can't. So my view is now changed. I think being able to communicate effectively, and above all, being a good listener. I think you have to listen more than you need to speak to be a good leader. But I think that we must invest in our people as much as possible, but be quick to recognise when that potentially isn't going to work, and not be afraid to say, as a leader, I made a mistake. He or she was the wrong person.
Thank you, Mark. Have you got a point on that?
I actually agree with Sarah about the. I've done exactly that. I've spent too much time with people that really the raw ingredients weren't there, and I think Max also said, people can be trained, but with some, it's a whole lot of effort. And I think the other thing is, and I think we do this in our life in general, you're almost hardest with the people that you think either can take it or have got something there, they've got something in them. And I was just thinking, there was a young man that worked for me. He worked for me for about 7 years, and he left about 7 years ago. We're still very, very close friends. He's going to go on to be an extremely wealthy and successful man. And in his first 12 months, he used to joke about having the hairdryer from me. For those of you that don't know, it's the old Alex Ferguson hairdryer treatment that you shout at people. But I didn't feel like I did that. But obviously, because we're such close friends, he's told a couple of stories about having the hairdryer from me over a couple of times, and I think it was because I really believed in him. I really liked him. I really thought he could take it. I really thought. I thought there was something there, and it was, and it was like being honest with your friends. You're honest because you feel that they can take it, and I think in terms of leadership, sometimes I'm probably thinking less and less now. I think I'm kind of getting almost what's the word I can say? Probably less likely to give someone the hairdryer treatment now, because I think it's almost less and less. I'm less and less sure people can take it, and I suppose one could say, as I'm getting older, that's maybe the modern way is probably the way I've evolved into, which is much softer. And as Ian said, I sort of do it and stand back a lot more now. Yeah, and one other thing I'd say as well, I know some very, very successful people that I've kind of grown up with that have gone on to run incredibly successful businesses. Absolutely not academic at all, just all drive and all leadership, not taught, just instinct. So, yeah, that's my thoughts, Ben.
It's interesting, Mark, what you said about the hairdryer treatment, and I think we've all experienced that in the past. But I think being a good leader is about being a bit of a chameleon, isn't it? We wear different outfits, different voices, even different stances when we're dealing with different individuals within our business. And I don't think there's a one leadership style that fits all with everybody in your business, and you do have to adapt to who is stood in front of you. So for instance, I wouldn't talk to my operations manager the way that I would talk to my sales team. It's a different approach. And sometimes it's even more nuanced than that, because it's about the individual's personality and knowing and understanding and taking the time, which is easier to do when you're a smaller business, much harder to do. And that's one of my challenges as I scale. It's much harder to have that intimate knowledge of understanding who you're talking to and what their drivers are. But then that comes back to what you said, Ian, about aligned values and making sure that everybody's aware of the long-term vision and values of the business. But it's definitely an adaptability piece when you're dealing with team members, for sure.
And I suppose really early on, Max, your first point was the difference between leadership and management. We're trying to confirm that, linking to that hairdryer treatment you talk about, Mark. Leadership is about kind of setting the goals, supporting people to be able to make their journey towards that. The management comes in when people aren't stepping up, when they aren't doing that. That's when you've got to step in and hopefully that hairdryer treatment isn't something that has to be used, but that's definitely more of a management technique than a leadership one, really, isn't it? I suppose the only time you might be shouting is to be, come on, get up here, as a leader. Yeah. More than shouting them down. So I suppose that we're coming to the end, really, of the time we've got. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm just looking in the comments. I can't see any questions that have been asked, but I know that some of the, just to maybe start to round up on some of the points that we've talked about. We've talked about communication, or clear communication is crucial to being able to unify a team and help them to understand that vision and buy into that vision. And that communication is reliant on trust and at the same time builds that trust within a team. So I suppose I've got a question for each of you. I suppose, do you know of a good leader in your time? You mentioned the ex-work colleague who you no longer work with, Mark. But I mean, we're really sort of talking about what are the key aspects for being a leader. I mean, is there someone that you look at and think, that is someone that I want to emulate? That's someone I know is a great leader. And what do you think, if there's one thing, can you pinpoint one thing that makes them stand out as that for you?
I'm happy to come in on that first. Sorry, Mark. Yeah, I mean, I have somebody that I work with quite closely, and for me, what sets her above other people, not better, but in my eyes, that what I get from that relationship and what I learn from her is clarity. And she has an ability to look into something with such amount of clarity that when you're inside a business, you can't always see. And for me, one of my key tasks that I have to learn is, and we were all, both Ben and Mark were in that session the other day, we're talking about looking outside in and inside out. And I think it's incredibly important. But yeah, having clarity of vision and almost cancelling out all the white noise around you to enable you to have that vision. I think that is what I take from a couple of people, but in the main one person that I work with at the moment.
You're not going to name them?
I'm more than happy to name them. Yeah. So I work with two people. I work with a lady called Martine, who is a non-exec director who's been in my industry for a long time and run companies, you know, turning over and millions of pounds and funding lines of hundreds of millions of pounds. And I work with her, I'm working with her quite closely on our growth strategy. And also I have I sit on an external peer-to-peer board, which I find extremely useful. And the moderator and the boss of that board, if you like, is a guy called Ted Robinson, who's been amazing for me. He's helped my personal development. As an SME and as a small business, we don't always get the opportunities to learn from a senior board. And so you make a lot of mistakes along the way. And so for me, my board is external, which I find incredibly useful. So yeah, Ted and Martine are my two little angels at the moment.
So clarity, a really key aspect for a good leader.
Definitely.
Mark, would you want to step in?
This will surprise her unbelievably, but my wife is she's built a sales team, and the response from them is unbelievable. And the word I was thinking of with her is authenticity. So she works extremely hard and she pushes them hard, but she's always got time to listen and I mean really listen about their home lives, their families, their, you know, and it doesn't matter how many hours she works in a day, she's always got time for them. And she's put together an incredible sales team in a very, very tough industry, automotive. And she'd be really surprised that I would say to her at the minute, but I've seen how she's put this sales team together. And, you know, it's authenticity was one of the words, but also caring. She's, you know, she genuinely cares about these people and about their families. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, so caring is the key bit. Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Ian.
So I think I'd have to go. There's quite a few over the years, but the one that comes to mind, all the way back to a mentor I had when I was at college, who just had an ability to communicate to you that he believed in you, and even when you were struggling to believe in yourself, and the confidence that gave you to stretch yourself. You know, it was the 1980s. He knew how to throw a hairdryer, but he also made me believe I could do stuff, and that enabled me to go and find out I could do it. And I think that's a massive thing from a leader, that leaving your team that feeling that you believe in them and encouraging them to believe in themselves.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. And finally then, Max.
Yeah, I've got two, if I may. I've had the longest time to think about it, so I've got two. One is Dave Doig. Dave Doig was one of my managers at BT. He was at 2 levels up from me, and I dropped off on one occasion, and when we talk about hair dryers, I didn't have any eyebrows after I'd had a session with Dave, but from then on, he completely forgot about that, and he backed me. A bit like Ian's mentor, he backed me and he enabled me to move on in my career. I think another manager who might have had a more laissez-faire attitude to what I'd done probably wouldn't have got that turnaround in me. And the other one, if I may, is since retiring from full-time employment, I worked for a chap called Alan Davis. Alan sadly died now, and he set up his main business at the age of 65 by cashing in his entire pension fund to develop some railway drain cleaning machines, and I ran his business for him when he reached 80, and he felt he couldn't run his business anymore. But there was a guy who absolutely backed himself and absolutely backed the people who worked for him, and just inspired so much loyalty because of that. So I've had two.
Sorry, Max, I'm going to push you for one thing. What's one thing that identifies with a leader? What's the skill set, the quality?
Well, I think, okay, I mean, it could go on for ages on that, but I'm going to go with Alan's backing himself. He had ultimate confidence that his vision was achievable, even though it was beyond the vision of most sensible people. But bear in mind, this is a bloke who'd also invented what did he invent? A self-serve chip making machine. You could buy, this thing. You could buy a bag of chips with a vending machine. It never worked, but he backed himself on that as well.
But I hope that the railway drain cleaning machine worked.
Oh, it worked so well. And I worked and ran his business and took it to the point of being able to exit that business, and he made a lot of money out of selling that business. So that was good. That
is a fantastic story to end on. Thank you, Max, because that idea that at the age of 65, when most people are kind of thinking about winding down, now there are individuals who can go and like you said, back themselves to the point where they risk everything for a vision they've got, and so just to wrap up, so the four things that the panel have highlighted. A good leader should have belief and confidence in their vision and drive for that. Should be able to instill that belief within their team, instilling self-belief and supporting others to join them on that journey. And the keys to that are clarity and being able to care for that team as well. So clarity of communication and caring. Lovely. I mean, this afternoon has gone absolutely wonderful. Really great conversation, guys. I just want to say thank you so much for spending the afternoon with me. I found it really insightful and thoroughly enjoyable. Is there anything that any of you would like to add before we finish?
No, other than I've learned something new again today. So thank you very much, panel. So always learning.
Thank you all, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Been great.
Yeah, thanks very much.
So this has been the Training Initiative Future Leaders webinar. My guests were Sarah Radley from Acuity Finance, Ian Harrison, leadership coach and author of The Enabling Manager, Mark Panades, owner of Obsidian Investments, and Max Reynolds, apprenticeship coordinator. You've been a fantastic panel. Thank you again. I'm just going to ask my team to post us. Is it already up? As I say goodbye, our next webinar is managing mental health in the workplace, strategies for supporting your workforce. That will be Thursday, the 29th of June. I will have a similarly expert panel joining me. It's just time now. Just put it down for a second, just to say goodbye to the panel. You may log off as you want, because that panel will stay up there. Thank you all. I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.